to discuss the EFF's anniversary celebrations and, of course, everything or some of the things that were said there. I'm joined by political analyst Dr. Dale Mckinley. Dr. Mckinley, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it. To focus on fighting the government of national unity. I suppose no surprises there.
Well, I wouldn't say it's surprising, but I would say it's disappointing because the EFF needs much more than that message. It has just performed its worst electoral performance since its formation. It actually lost support. It is a situation where it has been left out, obviously, because of its own choices, as well as the political situation from this GNU. And if it's going to simply, if its own message is, all its message is going to be is to fight the GNU, to reject the GNU, to reject the ANC, that's a politics of negativity. I think most people and most are looking for something more than that. They're looking for what the EFF is offering, what they're actually saying. And to cast that purely in racial terms, I think is not fitting necessarily the bill in contemporary South Africa. It's certainly part of the conversation, an important part of it, but certainly not the only one. Our politics has moved. And I think if the EFF doesn't move with it, then that message that it's giving, that Julius Malema was giving just now, is going to be received fairly lukewarmly by a majority of the South African population.
And that's exactly what I asked my colleague earlier, whether, from Julius Malema's speech, he at any point was ready to admit failures, that they themselves could be responsible for in light of that less than stellar performance in May.
Yeah, well, let's take the bull by the horn, so to speak. And it was MK, the appearance of MK right before the elections, that obviously sort of troubled the EFF waters greatly. I took, I think, quite a bit of possibly some of their support there. But beyond that, the EFF's track record, it was in coalition governments in several metros. It didn't particularly have a particular sparkling record in terms of those coalition metros. So its political performance was not judged very well. And I think also that many in the EFF are concerned, both within the EFF, ex-EFF members, people who used to support the EFF, are concerned about internal democracy within the EFF and its own leadership issues. It seems as though the EFF, without Julius Malema, is not a great deal more than an individual in that context. And I think the EFF needs to seriously consider, not only in terms of its own leadership, but needs to seriously consider whether or not this very sort of centralized, commandist kind of internal democracy is not actually hurting its own constituents and its own supporters. And I think that was shown in the last elections.
But let's then take what they have said, is going to be their focus, fighting the government of national unity. But how much of their, success will depend on how the GNU itself, conduct itself. In other words, less so what an EFF or an MK party, for that matter, can actually do.
That's a good question, Rio. And I think, I've said this numerous times, irrespective of the ideological issues at hand and where people can make legitimate criticisms of what's happened within the GNU and its sort of very multifaceted nature, and it's not really stands for a great deal. But if it can practically redress some of the key issues within the South African government and within the economy, then it's going to be very difficult simply to reject it. If, for example, the Home Affairs Department becomes more efficient at doing this basic work, if the Department of Trade and Industry cuts better deals for us on the international front, if the Department of Public Service Administration and other sort of get more delivery and more capacity and professionalization, and you begin to see improvements, then the electorate is going to respond to those improvements irrespective of the ideological components of that. And I think this is where the EFF has to move forward. and MK as well, for that matter, it's not going to cut it simply just to sort of repeat ideological positions without being able to convince people that they can and they have the capacity to fundamentally and practically change things for people, whether that's housing, education, electricity, water, whatever it might be. And I think that's the crucial point. So they've got some work to do in going beyond the politics of no, the politics of rejection, and beginning to offer a politics of vision and of potential, alternative governance. That's what an opposition does.
Well, when the discussions around the GNU started, the ANC said it was open to talking to everybody, including the EFF. Now, whether, of course, they were really committed to that is something, we can only speculate about. Just assuming that they were indeed genuine. Do you think the EFF's stance, or what they put forward as preconditions for deeper conversations, was the correct approach in that? So, we're prepared to talk but to the exclusion, if it's to the exclusion of the DA?
I don't think, when you go into any negotiations, you have to assess what are the bottom lines that you're willing to compromise on. And if one of those bottom lines, knowing full well, was, first of all, that the DA, cannot be part of that, that was going to be very, very difficult in the context of the realities of the electoral outcomes. But secondly, if you listen to Julius Malema and you listen to ex-President Zuma, they have a beef with Cyril Ramaphosa, a very specific beef, a personal beef from their own expulsions from the ANC, or at least, marginalizations and their own experiences. And that's a lot of their discourse is the ANC, Ramaphosa selling out and going in for capital and all these other kinds of things. So I would imagine that when they put that on the table and basically said both the DA can't be the part of this and Ramaphosa must go, or at least must be seen to be gone, that was never going to fly. They misread strategically, they misread the situation, which was irrespective of the ANC's poor showing at the elections, Ramaphosa remained in charge of the ANC, and it was not going to change overnight simply because they were demanding it. So I think they were outsmarted and out-strategized in these negotiations, and they find themselves out in the cold. Now, maybe they want to be there, maybe they want to be in the opposition, and that's fair enough. But they're going to have to then act like a mature and responsible opposition, which offers the voters something that they can say, well, don't go with the GNU and the ANC. It's going to be more than just a rejection of the DA, a racialized politics, and a rejection of Cyril Ramaphosa.
Of course, Julius Malema went into these celebrations having already declared his availability to lead the organization for as long as as that takes. Now, of course, Julius is the EFF, and EFF is Julius Malema, but can the party do the sort of things it may need to do to be able to, grow from where it is and to counter, such new players as your MK party, if it continues with him, or his stranglehold is not somewhat tempered with, so that there's more brains, but also more powerful voices within the party that he too can begin to listen to?
Absolutely. I think whether it's the EFF or any other political party, but particularly the EFF, which has grown its base on the basis of more younger membership, a more youthful membership, and appealing to that constituency, it's incumbent upon the leadership to basically broaden that base. If you want to build a cadre, if you want to build a capable party where you're having people that are being able to fill positions in a range of different, imagine the cabinet and 30-some cabinet positions. If you have to cross all of those particular areas, you need to develop. You need to have, that's why most political parties have training schools, they have political schools, they have courses, they They encourage their leaders to go to university, to do other things. But in the EFF, it appears as though, in some ways, much like I think the MK, they're going to have a problem if it revolves around one person or at least a very small coterie of individuals when it comes to succession. So yes, they've got to grasp that nettle. If they don't, I'm afraid that they might become increasingly divided themselves, and there'll be more conflict within the party themselves. We're already beginning to see some of that. But more importantly, I think that people who are watching, your potential supporters, your potential voters, are going to want to see some, transparency and accountability from the leadership. And right now, Julius Malema and the EFF are countering a very, difficult situation with the VBS scandal and others, and they've got to convince people, and they've got to offer different alternatives. And one way of doing that is to grow your leadership base.
Dale Mckinley, thank you very much for your time and insights. Really appreciate it.